The rain came at the edges of the street in thin silver threads, turning neon signs into loose coins of light. Under one of those coins, boxed between a noodle stall and a shuttered hardware shop, Wu Yin lived, worked, and streamed. A plastic tarp, a folding stool, a worn velvet cloth on which she stacked her talismans and cards. This was her pulpit. Her phone perched on a tripod, the camera angled to catch her hands and the small wooden stand that carried the tiny bronze bell from Wufang Valley. Her followers called it the little valley on the corner. She was good at making ordinary people feel seen. She had a gift for cutting through the static of a messy life and naming the one thing that mattered: an overdue apology, a phone call not placed, a courage not yet tried. She read palms in 5 minutes flat and made people laugh afterward. Sometimes she told fortunes with the lightness of a street performer. Sometimes she didn't leave until the subject left with an idea that could change the day. Tonight, she told fortunes for a small crowd of passers-by and for the live audience clicking through the feed. The chat scrolled like falling confetti. Hearts, laughing emojis, small digital coins that translated into rice and a night in a cheap hostel. She wore her hair in a loose knot and a coat someone had left behind on the valley road years ago. When the bell chimed, she felt the quiet pull at her ribs, the same way she had when she was a child and the valley elders marked her as the last practitioner of their little, stubborn tradition. Her life was not supposed to include the Tan family, not in the way other people thought. There had been a promise once, an arrangement made in rooms thick with teak and power. It was a ledger line in someone else's ledger, a name written beside another, an alliance tabulated like land, like business. Wu Yin had been a footnote on a contract she had never read. As arranged marriages often were, it had been negotiated without her, and then when the family forgot the smallest details of the negotiation, she was simply overlooked. She had the memory of that neglect like a stone underfoot, constant, a shape she navigated around. It had been the Tan family who paid tuition for an elder's care, who sent a carriage for an ailing aunt once, who made a quiet arrangement with Wufang Valley, a tie that would have bound her, in name if not in feeling, to their house. But she had been left in a small house in the outskirts, and the Tan family went on, polished and careful, as if the missing name had been a clerical error. For a while, she had thought she would go back to the valley and let the arrangement be as meaningless as their memory. Instead, she learned to survive by reading palms. He was not supposed to be in her street. Tan C had stopped for green tea on his way home, a rare detour from the high glass of Tan Group. He kept his phone in his pocket and his gaze on distant calendar entries, a man used to time being ordered for him. He was tall and precise, his jaw taut from decisions made in the boardroom, not under awnings. He noticed her because everyone notices something unexpected, a person who shouts truth into a rainy night and something in the shout lands. The overturned scooter came first. Orange plastic skittered across wet asphalt. A child, no older than 7, had bolted from behind a delivery van, and the scooter was in the path of a bus. It took Wu Yin 2 breaths, and the bell on the table chimed once as if summoned by instinct. She stepped into the street and grabbed the child by the sleeve. The world narrowed. 2 wet wheels, a bus horn, a man's hand fumbling for the brakes. She pulled. The scooter slid past her in a spray of water. The child's mother screamed, a raw animal sound that made the crowd thin. 10C watched because he had to. The CEO's reflex had hardened into watching hazards before they became headlines. He saw the woman, small, drenched, and holding a trembling girl, and the way her mouth moved as she spoke, not gossip, but a tidy, final set of words that seemed to stitch something into place. The crowd dissolved into relieved chatter. Someone from the street handed her a towel. Someone else shoved a phone into her hand. The live stream had caught the moment, and within seconds, the little bell's tone was mentioned in every comment. On the feed, she said nothing mystical or hollow. She wrapped the child's knees with a plastic bandage and turned the phone to the camera. Her voice was steady, worn but bright. "Keep your eyes," she told the child, with a small wink to the camera. "When streets scream, they are teaching you to be softer." She smiled at the viewers the way she smiled at a friend who had lost a coin and recovered it. GIFs pinged in the corner of the stream, virtual hearts sailed upward, and the number of followers nudged up by the hundreds. Someone typed, "Who is she?" Another offered, with the economy of the internet, #savior. A top commenter sent a ring emoji and a message, "CEO of Tan Group spotted." The chat lit with speculation, and across the city someone texted the CEO, "Are you okay?" seen on the feed. When the clip was cut and shared, Tan C's executive rhythm broke for a beat. He told himself it was a curiosity, a human blip. He told himself he did not know people like her. But the next morning his schedule had an unscheduled item. An assistant sent pictures, a small bulletin with one line attached. "Contact this woman. She may be relevant to the community program." He was very good at delegating curiosity. He was not very good at predicting how small moments would anchor. The arrangement, the whispered promise of a match that bound her name to the Tan household, was an accusation that sat inside him like an old coin. He had been taught to treat such things like logistics. His family had bound names like shares. They had set alliances. He had not been cruel to her in the way people are not cruel. He had merely never bothered to notice. That neglect would come back to him in ways he did not yet understand. For Wu Yin, the rescue changed nothing and everything. The donations paid for a month's worth of dry rice. The influx of viewers gave her a platform. But what changed most was not the money, it was attention. The way people looked at something that had been small and found it luminous. She noticed it like a tide. The more she did, the more the merit she carried. Small deeds folded into something larger seemed to hum under her skin. She used the platform as she always had, for work and to build a ledger of favors in a ledger no bank would accept, but the Valley had always valued. She streamed live as she helped 3 women escape a cheap flat where men had come and gone without names. She read palms for elders who whispered about wounds that had nothing to do with hands. She called the police sparingly, learned how to thread legal language into her pleas. The chat watched, donations streamed, the bell's tone was on every overlay. And yet there was distance. The Tan family's world glinted elsewhere. Their dinners, their contracts, their forgiveness given and rescinded were all in another key. For Wu Yin, approval mattered, but only because approval could translate into safety for a child or a woman. She did not need a name in a ledger. She needed the person next to her to stop bleeding. The difference was a mirror to the whole city. "Her name is Wu Yin," someone shouted into the mic one night when the feed swelled. Her followers wanted an origin story. She had one, but she was cautious with it. She told a version, a childhood in Wufang Valley learning to read the weather in people's palms, and left the more complicated line unsaid. The arranged marriage? She skirted it with a laugh and a quiet shrug. "Everyone's been promised to someone they never met," she told the chat. The audience loved the line. Sharing it felt like a small rebellion. Tan Si watched one of those streams on a wireless screen in his office, the city glowing behind him like another kind of valley. He watched her say,
Good deeds stack up even when no one sees them, and the way her hands moved while she tied a talisman over a sleeping child. He was not supposed to be moved. He was supposed to allocate resources, approve or deny, and move to the next thing. By the 10th time he watched her tie a talisman and smile like she was telling a joke that the world did not get, he felt a shift, slight and insistent. He checked her profile, watched past clips, saw the one from the market where she had stood up against a man who had tried to take advantage of a film student. Her assistant called her an influencer, which was a new word for something old. The city breathed, and Wu Yin kept moving.
Her life was a set of small rescues stitched together, an alleyway intervention here, a late-night bargain for transport there. Each one carried merit which she felt like a physical thing, a warmth at her pulse, a lightness that lifted a cough from a stranger. The Valley's teachings had always treated merit like currency, but not the kind bankers understood. It was accrued through humility, through the repair of harm. In public, it shimmered as charisma and goodwill. In private, it abraded parts of her. There was a cost. When she healed another's small fracture of trust, she paid with sleep. Her fame grew like ivy. Someone with a camera captured a rescue in a building with peeling paint, the rescuing of a teenager whose phone had been turned off for days, and within hours she had 1,000 messages asking for help, 100 asking for advice, 10 asking to meet. She said yes to few. She could not save everyone. That decision sat heavy and clean, like a stone she had to lift and put down each night. It was during one of these rescues that the soft CTA was made obvious. The chat exploded as she walked the teenager down from the building. "She should get a show," someone typed. Another, more practical voice wrote, "Subscribe, this woman is doing real work." The comment had nothing of the showman. It was a request for more, for continuity. If viewers wanted to follow, if they wanted to be part of it, a click could be the difference between a rescue and an unread plea. She saw it in the chat, the impulse of a crowd that cared, and she smiled. "If you want to help me get to the places that need me, follow the channel," she said softly, and the viewers obliged. It was not vanity, it was survival. The bell chimed in the corner of the frame as a gift ping. That night, after the rescue and the donations and the new followers settled like ash, she received a message that was not like the others. A forwarded clip came with a line, "Evidence from 3 years ago." The clip was grainy, but old tech always told stories differently. It showed a pale corridor and a young woman's profile, her hair pulled back. She had a small birthmark beneath the left shoulder blade, crescent-shaped, like the moon in the Valley's old rhyme. The woman moved like someone in pain, and then the clip ended, a static flicker and a small handwriting scrawled across the footage, "Cheng Yi Ning." Wu Yin's fingers trembled. Names had weight. That name had a pull like a river. She knew the stories of heiresses and vanished girls. She had read them in the chat when they surfaced, joked at them with friends, dismissed them as gossip. But this clip felt like an edge. The name came with implications, a frame, a missing woman, a man named Wei Shin rounded up and caged with a verdict like a heavy stone. She could trace things that other people missed. She was trained to watch for small signs, a string of 3 identical scratches on a door, the way someone folded a letter into quarters, a talisman placed upside down. She kept the footage in a folder and watched it twice. On the 3rd watch, she paused at the shoulder where the birthmark should have been visible. She could not see it clearly, the grain ate the detail, but she felt it, an old wound echoed by the image. Sang Hillage asked for her next. The message came not as direction, but as a tug. There were rumors. Camphor trees whispered the old language of the place, and villagers believed in spirits who took up wrongs and held them tight.
People sent her notes and video diaries, children coaxed by men into vans, women who returned with strange uses for their hands. Her followers pushed. If she wanted to pursue the footage's shadow, she would have to leave the city and go to a place where roads became memory. She packed a bag and took with her a small wooden orb, an old valley artifact meant to hold fragments of memory. The elders in Wufang Valley had taught her how to repair a broken memory orb with a few whispered rituals. The orb did not speak until something of merit had been done. It was a crude technology of faith, an archive for things the world wanted to forget. She held it like a compass and stepped onto a train. When she arrived in Sang village, the air smelled of camphor and damp earth. The village was older than the city, its roofs bowing under seasons. People greeted her with a mixture of caution and hope. She did not call herself a savior. She called herself someone who could see, and that was enough. She slept in a small room under beams and ate rice with women who had the look of people who knew every price of pain. The camphor spirit was not a thing that snarled from a tree. It had become, in these stories, the name for a pattern. Men who trafficked and men who paid used the presence of the spirit as a talisman to hide their crimes. The spirit, they said, took who it needed and left an ache in their places to keep other people away. Wu Yin laughed the laugh of someone who had learned to find metaphors and make them practical. She listened to the women and took notes. On a third night, she followed a track into the woods where the camphor trees leaned like old judges. There was light among the roots, a makeshift shelter of plastic and rusted pipes. A woman huddled there, eyes like coal embers. Men had left the place in a hurry, their voices left echoes in the mud. Wu Yin found a diary with pages damp but legible. The handwriting was shaky. There, in a page folded into quarters, was a line about a night bus, a name, and the smell of talc. The place name crossed out was the same one that appeared on the grainy clip, Cheng. The diary spoke of a scar under a collar, a small crescent mark, and a promise to find her name again. Wu Yin's chest clenched.
Evidence was slow work, an accumulation of things that made a story undeniable. Here was a page. Here was a place that matched grainy footage. Here, in the hush of the village, was a witness who could point to a face and say, she was taken. The merit she carried flared like someone turning on a lantern in fog. She lifted her phone and began to stream. She did not do it for fame now. She did it so the world could see the faces that had been kept small. The stream filled with messages. The chat moved faster than the ground under her feet. People sent money. People sent names. People sent outrage. It was proof that the internet could be a kind of justice when it chose to be. She tagged the video, sent it to contacts, and a clip of the diary went to a friend in a small investigative outlet. The friend sent back a message that read simply, "Get DNA." DNA was a word that opened doors. It was the kind of evidence that could not be waved away with a polite denial or an economic shrug. It would not prove everything, but it would change the conversation. She made a plan. Rescuers, villagers who wanted to keep the valley's secrecy, a discreet line to a lab that owed a favor to a friend of a friend. Even the valley's codes could bend when enough human harm was on the line. She did not know when she left Sang village that someone watched the stream with a slow and private anger. Liu Mingzhu had long ago taken the name of Chang Yi Ning as if it were an article of clothing, and she wore it with the practiced ease of an actress who had memorized her lines. Her mother, Liu Jinmei, had built a life out of adjustment and crafting. They had been careful. People in power disliked being called liars. People who had reconstructed a life on a stolen name disliked the sudden, dangerous light that streamed into their kitchen.
Back in the city, Tan Si sat at a gala he did not expect to enjoy. It was a charity, a cause that had always been the Tan family's public comfort, a time to stand among donors and whisper of obligations. He had RSVIP'd out of habit. He had not expected to see Wu Yin on the list. She was not of their world. Her presence at such events was a scandal or a statement, depending on which family branch you asked. But she had been invited by a small NGO that wanted more visibility, and she had said yes without fanfare. When she arrived, she was the same person she had been under the tarp, direct, unadorned, and not a hair wrong. Her presence was an accusation in tailored clothes. He watched her speak on a small stage later that evening, answering a question about Sang Village with the bluntness that made strangers listen. Merit is not a private bank. If you have enough of it, you cannot keep it to yourself. The room was polite. His grandfather, old money in a softer suit, nodded absently. He had thought once that the arrangement that named Wu Yin as an allied name in their ledger was a concession, a cultural courtesy.
The chat brought pleas and facts, and eventually a lead. A woman who recognized the handwriting had paid for a second test in a private clinic and had a little envelope of lab results. It was not official, but it was a place to start. Get DNA, the friend had said. Evidence had weight. It created consequences. Wu Yin learned how to gather more. She found CCTV footage that, when played in a slowed sequence, showed a car with a logo matching a shell company tied to a member of the Chang family. She rescued a woman who gave a name and then wanted to retract it for fear. She kept filming. Each clip was a small photograph of courage. Each clip lit her merit. Each clip increased the hum in her chest until she could feel how close she was to some threshold. Tan Si watched as the numbers on her live streams swelled. He watched his assistants translate the chatter into spreadsheets. He could see the impact, donations moving across accounts, public discourse shifting. In the boardroom, his family discussed optics and liability. He watched his grandfather name charity as reputation. He began to feel, clearly and dangerously, like he had to choose between family elegance and the very human woman who had made pennies from sympathy and bravery. There were nights he would come to her small apartment and sit on the floor, awkward in a chairless room, and ask her about the valley. She would tell him about the elders who taught her to listen to the sound a room made when it was honest, and he would listen with the concentration that he usually reserved for board plans. He offered small gestures, a bandage, a doctor's number, a ride, and she accepted them because they were practical and because she had always been practical. The more he gave, the more his chest tightened with something like wanting. He did not know the vocabulary yet. He only knew that when she laughed, he felt safer, which was terrifically inconvenient. Not everyone liked her rise. The city is a house with many rooms and a dozen hidden doors. Liu Jin-mei watched Wu Yin's feed and felt like an intruder had come to examine a house she had painstakingly built out of stolen plans. The messages she sent were polite at first. Please stop broadcasting. Then sharper. You will damage families. Her daughter, Liu Mingzhu, who bore Chang Yining's name with a practiced smile, arranged for a thin, ominous man to follow Wu Yin one evening as she walked home. He took a picture from a distance and sent it to a group where the old money tongued the city's reputation like an old ledger. Threats are like the city's own weather, predictable if you live with them. Wu Yin was not easily cowed. She had grown used to walking alone down alleys with only the bell and the soft armor of her faith. But this time there was a different smell, legal things moving in the dark. The Chang family were careful. They had lawyers and a sense of how to apply pressure through channels that made people tired. When the platform's administrators flagged one of her broadcasts for unsourced allegations, she felt the old valley silence press against her. Her feed was temporarily restricted. People who had been watching for the human were quick to respond. A million tiny protests rose, tweets, threads, a petition. Tansy used his influence the way he had learned to, quietly. He asked a friend on the board of the platform to look again. He arranged for legal counsel to advise Wu Yin pro bono, and for a discreet team to catalog every clip, every diary page. He did it with the kind of precision that had made him an effective CEO, which made it all the stranger when his help was not simply tactical. He would stay until the last call was done, and then walk her back to the street to make sure she crossed to the light. The charity gala approached like an inevitability. It was an event that would convene the families who liked to keep their shame inside velvet pockets. It would be a place to speak in public, to be seen with the right people. For Wu Yin, it was an opportunity. She planned to show a short compilation of footage, a grainy clip, the diary page, a small piece of audio from a woman who had been paid to remain silent. She would not confront anyone by name at first. She would, instead, offer a pattern. Patterns are persuasive. They do not accuse, they reveal. Liu Jinmei was not the only woman in the city who watched that night and found her palms sweating. Wei Xin, who had sat in a cell and tasted the cold ring of early morning in an alien time, watched from the other side of a half-closed curtain. There was a fierce hope in him that someone would see the truth. A man can be broken by a single verdict, and yet the hope for exoneration is a stubborn thing. He had not expected a small woman with a valley bell to be his champion, but hope bends toward those who listen. At dinner, as the city outside hissed and the gala moved into late hours, Tansy found himself at the end of his own reckoning. He had been raised to measure worth by the clarity of deeds and the steadiness of hands. He had been taught to propose and to contract and to tidy everything into an efficient order. Wu Yin had undone a part of his order simply by existing in it. She was not a cause to be managed. She was a force that made him notice his choices. That night, he watched her across the room, the way she threaded through donors and victims with equal attention, the way she paused when a woman in the crowd clenched a hand. He felt something like shame, and then like an urgent tenderness that had roots in the past omission, the name that had been written and never claimed. He thought of the ledger and the footnote. He thought of the moment he had seen a grainy clip and felt his life tilt. He went to her, and when he spoke, his voice was unpracticed with need. "You have a way of making the city look small," he said, an odd compliment. She smiled at the line like she had heard it before from other strangers. "It's the city that's small," she replied, "not me." He laughed down at her, genuinely, because she had not asked for his pity, demanded his charity, or courted his protection. She had only, piercingly, asked the world to remember its people. When the gala ended, he did something that a year earlier he would not have done. He walked her to the curb and called a cab for her. He told his driver to wait while she was gone. It was not negotiation. It was a small sign that he was willing to create time for her that he had previously spent in other tasks. He kept his hand at the small of her back when she stepped into the car, as if to create a small boundary against the breathless night. They did not speak of romance, not yet. They spoke of safety and of evidence, and of how to get a DNA test unnoticed by people who had the resources to make things disappear. He suggested a delicate legal channel at the university hospital. She considered and then nodded. His offer was a kind of safety net. She accepted it because she needed it. The acceptance was not a surrender. It was a calculation. That night, in the shelter of her room, she opened the memory orb. It was an old thing, carved with camphor grain and bound in string.
She had been taught that an orb did not return a picture until enough merit had been accrued to justify the cost of recollection. She had thought of the orb as sentimental until then, a curio for the valley's old poets. This time, the light inside the orb was warm. The fragments coalesced, a girl with a crescent mark, a laugh muted by fear, a hand that would not let go. The orb whispered memories she did not know she had, and she pressed her palm to it like a key. The fragments were not enough to convict. They were enough to make a promise of someone who had been erased. As she slept, drained and dangerous with the day's work, the city outside hummed, and some doors in the Tan household opened with quiet. Tan Si could not sleep. He thought of ledger lines and of faces. He thought of the name he had failed to notice, and of the woman who had made the street into a stage for truth. He moved in his mind through the small acts he could perform: firm letters, a discreet lab test, a public defense. His life was a series of contracts, some of them he wanted to break. On the worst nights, the ones that tasted of lonely regret, he imagined her leaving. The thought was not practical, it was a pain. He had to remind himself that feelings were not plans. Yet the sensation lingered, a longing that made him clumsy in a way he'd never admitted. It was a good, dangerous thing. 2 nights later, as the city held its breath between storms, Wu Yin stood on a small bridge outside Sang Village, the orb warm in her hand, and watched footage she had gathered from a forgotten diner camera.
She slowed the clip until frames resolved into the outline of a face, and there, under the hood of a man's jacket, was a profile that matched a woman she had seen on the gala stage, Lu Mingju, Chang Yi Ning, as she called herself in other rooms. The face was there for a breath. A small hand passed a packet. The packet met a dark car. Her phone buzzed with a dozen alerts. Her stream was live, and the feed flooded with speculation and support. She felt the hum climb like a tide. She could take this to the authorities and ask them to act. She could post the footage and force transparency. She could also be stopped by lawyers, by money, by the things people do when they decide something matters more than the truth. The moment she lifted her head from the clip, she saw him standing at the far end of the bridge, Tan Si, coat collar up, like a man who had walked too far in the rain. He did not shout or move with the certainty of someone with a prepared speech. Instead, he crossed the distance and stood beside her, without asking permission. He watched the frames with her, elbows almost touching. He offered no interference, only the presence of someone who wanted to witness. They did not resolve it there. The clip was small, the proof not complete. What she had was a pattern, a diary page, a fragment of footage, a woman's testimony. None of it was a verdict, but patterns are persuasive. They make institutions move. As people watched, Wu Yin let the feed run. Comments poured. "Play it again. Get a DNA kit. We're with you." The platform beeped in the distant city like a promise. Behind them, in the place where elders kept secrets and children learned to keep promises, a record stirred. In a house of privilege, someone noticed a thread tugging at their hem and began, with annoyance, to pull. The rain began to fall again, not heavy, but in a way that softened the city's edges. Tan Si stood with her in that rain, and for the first time he asked not to manage, but to be reliable. He looked at her, not with gratitude, she could do without gratitude, but with the recognition that some people stepped into other lives, and in doing so, shifted the shape of things. He was shifting around her. The feeling in his chest was not yet affection, it was notice, and notice deepens into something else before a person knows the name of it. They left the bridge with different things in their pockets. She had the orb and the diary fragment. He had the beginning of a plan and the knowledge that his ledger had a hole. Neither of them knew how violent the hole would prove to be. The city was a place that swallowed names for reasons that were efficient and small.
at the end of that night, when they parted at the curb and she walked toward the small room that held her bell, Wu Yin swallowed the urge to tell him everything she felt. She had been promised and left, and turned that abandonment into a way to see the world.
She had a life to keep and a list of people who would need her next. He had grown unexpectedly earnest and dangerous in the most appealing way, willing to risk a reputation to keep her safe. She did one small thing before she fell asleep. She put the diary page next to the orb and whispered a valley phrase under her breath, more tether than ritual. The orb flared. It did not show faces so much as feelings. A cramped room, a man who smelled of cigarette smoke, a woman whose laugh had once been untroubled. It was not proof, it was a portkey to resolve. Outside, the city churned. Inside, negotiations began, some legal, some moral. The Tan family would not yield without a fight. The Chang family would tighten their fingers. Liu Jinmei would not sit silently as her plans were unspooled. Wei Xin's name hung like a bruise, waiting to be tested. The platform could be an ally or an obstacle. Wu Yin's followers would be a chorus, and Tan Si would find himself somewhere he had not planned to be, on the edge of choosing, and without noticing, he had already chosen once, to bend the machinery of his life into a tool for hers. That choice had weight. It made enemies. It made him lighter. The days that followed moved like quick-cut scenes. Wu Yin stitched together interviews, diary pages, and stolen minutes of footage until the edges met. An old woman in Sang village remembered the license plate of the van she had once seen at a market and sketched the last digits from memory. A kitchen boy who had been paid to watch the comings and goings of a guest house described a red scarf and a voice that hummed songs to a child. Someone in a comment thread uploaded a shaky clip they'd held on a thumb drive for years. Two figures arguing on the steps of a diner at 3 in the morning. Wu Yin slowed the clip and watched a hand slip a small envelope into another hand. The envelope's seal carried a crest she had seen once in an old ledger, a looped S that matched a shell company on a list Tan Si's team had quietly circulated to journalists. Every small proof mattered. Evidence liked to gather like rain in a gutter. You only needed to point at the stream and the city would notice the sound. They planned the DNA test with the care of people making something irreversible. The sample source was humble, an old ribbon pinned inside a diary page, singed at the edge and smelling faintly of nail polish. It had been sewn into the book like a secret. Wu Yin wrapped it in cloth and sent it through a courier to a lab at the State University, the kind of lab that answered favors for small-time reporters and old professors who kept grudges like collections. Tan Si arranged the legal channel, not with boardroom bluntness, but in the soft, precise way someone arranges a medical transfer. He insisted on the proper warrants, knowing every slip could be used against them. He had learned to submit to procedure when the alternative was chaos. The test took longer than anyone wanted.
The pause was a thin, anxious thing that stretched nights. While they waited, Wu Yin continued to stream. She did not stop doing small rescues. She believed that merit, however mystical the vocabulary, was not simply accumulation. It was an active force. You had to spend it, not hoard it. And tenants slept. Followers multiplied into volunteers. People brought supplies. A truckload of donated clothing arrived because someone in the chat convinced a manufacturer to stop waiting on margins and to send the goods now. The platform, which had once flagged her, reversed the restriction quietly after a small PR flurry. A policy review, they said. The chorus of voices, the lab reports in queue, and the thin pressure from a CEO who had quietly called a board member had coalesced into a soft shove. Wu Yin did not celebrate the platform's change. She celebrated a woman reunited with a son. But not all reprisals worked through print and terms of service. One night, a car followed her after a long day of filming. Its headlights lingered like questions.
She felt the familiar weight of someone watching, and instead of pretending otherwise, she reached for the practical. She called a number Tansi had given her, and a driver arrived within minutes, a tall man with quiet eyes who had the right kind of silence for protection. They took the Hongyang Bridge detour, an old route that curved over a river and avoided the downtown arteries where cameras clustered. The detour was supposed to be a safety measure. It turned into a rescue. At the mid-curve of the bridge, the driver slowed at something half hidden beneath the guardrail, a bundle of clothes and a child's sneaker half buried in the salt grit. Wu Yin's breath hitched. The driver fumbled open the trunk, and a thin man in a cheap windbreaker bolted away into the dark. They called the police, and while they waited, not wanting to startle a nightmarish scene, Wu Yin crept close and saw the outline of a small body curled against a concrete post. It was Shaolin, a local name that had popped in comments and whispered tips for weeks, the one the chat had insisted they could not ignore. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of voices, and a small animal hiss left her chest. Someone from the police took statements, someone from Tan Group covered for the hospital bill. The girl was warm in Wu Yin's lap, and as the ambulance doors closed, Tan Si stood outside the flashing lights and did something people rarely saw him do. He trembled with relief and with a private kind of fury. "That could have been on my watch," he said, and his words were not meant to absolve, but to admit. He did not lecture. He listened to the paramedics, asked the right questions, and when the girl was admitted, he stayed a long time, his hand in his pocket while she slept. It was small, but it was the kind of devotion that writes itself into public myth. The CEO who detoured and found a child in the dark because the woman he'd overlooked had taught him how to look. Those who followed the story felt the bridge scene as if it happened to them. A new earnestness rose in the chat. Donations jumped. Volunteers showed up to canvass neighborhoods after the story hit a local news cycle. Wu Yin's merit, whatever name one gave it, hummed. Then the lab called. It was a slow afternoon. Rain had been in the forecast, the air cool and sharp like the city was inhaling. Wu Yin had been in a tiny room at an NGO office, the orb tucked under her arm like a talisman of a different kind. The university lab's number flashed on a borrowed phone. She thought of waiting, of letting procedure grind on, but the ring had urgency in it. A technician, precise and slightly apologetic, said the word match and then explained, in a voice that tried to be clinical but could not hide its tremor, that the sample had yielded a viable profile and that it matched a record in a municipal archive. The match was not abstract. It corresponded to a hospital file, a birth record tied to a private clinic the Cheng family had used. It was the kind of bureaucratic chain that could be requested only when someone with legal authority made a motion. Tan Si made that motion. He did not move it by fiat. He signed papers, filed requests, and did not mention his name. He learned how to be useful without walking in the front door. The DNA did not speak the whole truth. It hooked the narrative so that other things could climb up. It matched a woman who had registered under a different name at a small coastal shelter 2 seasons earlier. Wu Yin's hands shook when she saw the file. The shelter's address was a cottage 3 towns down, a place no one would visit without knowing grief by habit. She traveled with a volunteer and a cameraman who treated the work like something holy, careful, quiet, reverent. The woman at the shelter had sun-leathered hands and a scar when she raised her arm that made the old valley rhyme tumble through Wu Yin's memoryscape, the crescent under the shoulder blade. She called herself Chow, and she had learned to forget a name she could not afford to risk. When Wu Yin sat across from her and asked, softly, "Do you have a birthmark?" Chow hesitated and then lifted her left arm. There it was, a crescent white as a coin's edge. The moment the skin caught light, something in Chow's body unclenched. She spoke haltingly, about a bus,
about being told to lie about a name, about a night when someone had said, "You can be anyone we need you to be." Wu Yin listened and did not interrupt with analysis. She took the woman's hand and told her the valley's line about merit being like a river, it finds its bed. They brought Chow to the police with an advocate from the NGO and with a file that had become a map, diary page, CCTV stills, shell company paperwork, DNA report. The police, who had previously been comfortable in the middle of cases that smelled of money, found themselves moving. Legal warrants were issued for searches. Charges were drawn for identity fraud, human trafficking, and obstruction of justice. The Chang household, which had always managed discomfort with porcelain calm, found itself stunned by the speed of procedural law when someone outside their ledger applied pressure. The charity gala arrived like a tide. Invitations glittered and the world dressed itself in careful smiles. The Tan family threaded their pearls and spoke pre-planned toasts about civic duty. They did not expect live evidence, they expected performance. Wu Yin did not go to the gala to make enemies. She went to hold the room to a light and to make a pattern visible. She had rehearsed nothing. She trusted the work. Her plan was modest in shape and bold in consequence. She would present a curated stream, a compendium of the best small pieces, and let the city judge. She had a lawyer on stage with her, and in the wings, Tan Si stood like a man about to open his own heart in public. The stream's overlay filled screens with chat bubbles and gift pings as people tuned in. The audience inside the hall watched the broadcast on the projection wall with polite distance. Wu Yin's voice was steady. She introduced the pattern without fanfare, diary, footage, witness testimony, and then, when everyone could see the stills of CCTV frames distorted by bad light but plausible as a sequence, she played the clip that mattered. Liu Mingju moving like a woman who had practiced grief. The clip paused at the moment when a hand slipped an envelope to a man who had held courtrooms like currency. Silence is a sound you can feel. In that silence, someone at the back of the room whispered to a neighbor, and then the whisper spread. Tan Si watched his grandfather's face tighten as if someone had reminded him of an unpaid entitlement. He felt his throat close in a way that was not business, it was personal. Then Wu Yin played the recording of Chow identifying the crescent and speaking the words that made names matter again. She turned to the camera and said little. The chat exploded. The platform's hosts whispered about procedure. The woman who had once been called Cheng Yi Neng stood up from the audience, a small, sun-worn figure with a public who had not expected to find her at such a function, and walked to the front. It was as cinematic as any script could ask for, a woman reclaimed by her own voice. Liu Jinmei did not wait. She stepped forward in a silk dress, color like distracted ambition, and launched an accusation that smelled of legal threats. She did not expect Chow's testimony, and she certainly did not expect the DNA report to be in the hands of the authorities at that very moment.
A police officer, who had been civil until then, interrupted with a warrant. It was a quiet scene of men and women who had rehearsed their parts until the last minute, lawyers murmuring, an officer opening the file, a technician preparing the chain of custody. Then, in the light on the stage, Tan Si did something that would be written about in newsrooms and in the soft columns of weekend papers. He stepped forward to the microphone and did not speak about policy. He did not call for restraint. He spoke like a man unwrapping a private ledger in public. "Names are not shares," he said. The words were simple, and they landed. They are people. He turned to Wu Yin in a movement that was not planned. The room saw him for the first time without the armor of boardroom calm.
"You were promised by people who made promises like transactions," he said to her, and his voice steadied into something like confession. He meant the ledger that had been wronged. "I did not notice. I am sorry for that. I will make sure we do the right thing now." His grandfather's expression was stone. Tan Si's brother-in-law, Tan Zi, who had been counting reputational risk like one counts calories, made a small calculation and then did something that surprised everyone. He stood up too, but not to defend the house. He stood to say that the Tan family's wealth was not worth stealing names. The room experienced that moment like the breath before thunder. It was as if the house finally shifted its weight to the side of decency. Arrests followed with a procedural, almost prosaic efficiency. Police moved through velvet lounges and through back corridors. Liu Jinmei and Liu Mingzhu were escorted out with their own version of outrage, perfected faces of wronged dignity, which only made the evidence more pointed. The journalists in attendance reached for mics. The platform's live chat spilled into the hall's hush. The cameras filmed the arrests like a way of holding the city to account. Outside, in the press scrum, Wei Xin watched footage of his name being cleared, as if he were a man watching a sentence lifting from his chest. He had been a shadow in the story for so long that tears surprised him when he realized they were coming. Wu Yin did not take a victory pose. She sat with Chow and bore the interviews with a gentle steadiness. When a reporter pressed, "Did you ever want the glory?" she answered simply, "No, I wanted people to be able to come home." The legal follow-through was not miraculous. Courts do not bend on a single night. Papers were filed, lawyers made their moves. The prosecutors took a methodical approach. They interviewed witnesses, catalogued the chain of custody, and retraced payments that led to shell companies linked by invoice strings. The Chang household mounted a defense, of course. They had the advantage of history and money. But the public moved in a different direction now. The social pressure that Wu Yin had conjured, the audience of ordinary people who had watched and donated and called once a day, was itself a kind of civic muscle. Prosecutors leaned into it. They found the courage to subpoena bank records. They found the courage to bring forward a case that other offices had let slide. In the weeks that followed, the city experienced a kind of ungluing. Old cases were reopened. Investigations that should have been done were done. Wei Xin, whose name had been a stain on his life, received a formal apology from a prosecutor's office who admitted error. He spoke afterward like a man who had been given back a day of life he had not expected, cautiously joyful, furious with the system that failed him, and grateful for the small woman who'd refused to let his story die in silence. Wu Yin's platform grew beyond what she had imagined, but growth here was not only numerics and followers, it became the center of a small network that turned clicks into help. She hired a small team, former social workers, an ex-journalist who could redact names, and a tech-savvy volunteer who kept their streams secure. She built a physical space where women could come for hot tea and legal referrals. It was hardly a foundation in the grand sense, but it was a functional place where people were named again. The Wufang Valley elders watched all of this with a mixture of approval and private concern. Merit, they said in letters, could be spent badly, on spectacle, on rivalry, but it could also be spent well. They counseled Wu Yin not to let herself be eaten by the city's appetite for more. She listened. She learned to say no. Tan Si learned to say yes in the public ways people notice. He gave a speech on corporate accountability that read like an apology at first, and then like a promise. He forked internal budgets toward trafficking prevention and pledged a fund for victims. He stood at a press conference, and when reporters asked about his relationship with Wu Yin, he steered away from gossip with a new, careful candor. "It started with a rescue," he said, eyes on the cameras. "It became a responsibility, and responsibilities change a man." They watched his growth as they would watch a slow bloom. He did not make grand gestures of the kind that make tabloids sing. He made decisions that moved people's lives. He stood up at shareholder meetings and argued for grants. He visited shelters in person, not to be seen, but to listen. He supported Wu Yin when platforms tried bureaucratic penalties. He did not buy her work. He leveraged his access to open doors. Their intimacy, when it arrived, was patient and mutual. They worked together, argued about strategy, and sometimes walked in silence on a night when the city had calmed. He learned the valley proverbs and joked badly about them. She learned the right questions to ask about corporate audits.
The romance that bloomed between them was not sudden. It was a series of small vows. He would stand in a hall and correct his family. She would accept his ride to a late-night hospital and not mistake it for a demand. He fell, not like a man undone by fairy tale, but like a man who had finally stopped treating names like columns in a ledger and began to treat them like lives. They had a public moment that became the shorthand for their story. At a press event for the new fund, a woman asked Tan-Si directly if his relationship with Wu Yin influenced his choices. He could have answered evasively. He did not. He paused, looked at Wu Yin, and said in a voice both private and loud enough for microphones, "She is the reason I learned to notice." It was the sentence tabloids distilled into headlines. CEO falls head over heels. People liked the romance angle. They liked redemption stories. But what the headlines did not show, what was not profitable for quick clipping, was Wu Yin's flourishing in ways that had nothing to do with romance. She had built a network that saved names, not bank accounts. She had restored dignity. She had been offered return paths to Wufang Valley, and she had negotiated them like a person deciding between two lives, rather than being swept. The valley called more than once. Elders wrote to say, gently, that doors would always be open if she needed the cool of the camphor trees and the quiet work of apprenticeship re-won. Wu Yin felt the pull with a clarity that had not been possible when she had been small and promised. She had earned a place in the valley's ledger by work, by merit of the public good she had done. But the valley's compassion was not a chain, it was a choice. The decision she reached surprised no one and everyone. On a morning when winter loosened into a humid breath and the city smelled of wet pavement, she announced a plan that made the tabloids sigh with satisfaction and the elders breathe with something like relief. She would stay. She would remain in the city to run the center she had begun. She would also teach, in a seasonal way, returning to Wufang Valley twice a year to train a new steward, someone who could learn the craft of quiet service. It was both compromise and expansion. She would not abandon the valley, nor would she return to its hills and hide. Tan-Si listened to the announcement with an expression that had become familiar, soft, amazed, protective. He took her hand after the press had cleared and the cameras had left, in a small courtyard behind the NGO where they could speak without microphones. He did not kneel. He did not make vows that were performative. He said things he had learned to feel. He was sorry for not noticing. He would work to be better. And he loved her in a way that meant he would stay. She laughed, a sound like an old bell.
"You are sentimental in a way that suits you poorly," she said, and they both smiled, because that was their language now, teasing that bent into tenderness. The city continued to be a messy thing. Not every case closed neatly. Some families clung to power. Lawyers twisted truths into gray. But the pattern had changed. People found courage in other people's courage. The rescued women learned to rebuild their days. Chow reclaimed her name. Cheng Yi-ning on a quiet afternoon with a cup of tea and a few close witnesses signing a small affidavit. When she went to retrieve her identity, it was not dramatic. She sat in Wu Yin's office, the bell on the shelf catching the light, and told the room the things she had learned about being wanted and being owned. Her voice was steady. She would not be the same person who had been named and rebranded. She had a new life to make steady. The Tan family was not destroyed. Families of wealth rarely are, but they had to account for choices. Public reputations are porous things, and when one hole opens, the water often finds a new path. Chen Xi's grandfather retired from the public boards, with a letter that read like an apology and like a retainer for better counsel. Chen Xi learned to measure a ledger against a life, and lost some investors who liked their men to be simpler. These were small, shifting sands compared to the lives that had been hurt for years. Wu Yin flourished in a way that honored the title that had, at first, sounded like irony. She had been an arranged note in a family ledger, overlooked and left to the margins. She had turned the margin into a stage, and in doing so, turned the world's attention into a tool for justice. Her fame did not swallow her. She used it. She refused vanity when it offered her applause without consequence. She refused to let her own narrative become an object. She made the narrative a weapon for others. Chen Xi fell, in a way the city liked to cheer for, because it was redemptive and human. He fell not because she rescued him from celebrity, but because she showed him how to notice. He defended her publicly and privately, and in doing so, he also rescued himself in some ways. He learned to prioritize people over positions and to measure his legacy in lives, not lines on balance sheets. There was a last scene they would return to again and again in stories and in quiet memory. It was not the gala, nor the lab, nor the courtroom. It was a rainy afternoon on a street that had once been the entire world to Wu Yin. She had set up the tarp again, though it had more support now. Donations had bought a sturdier tripod and a better camera, but it was still the same small place where she read palms. Chen Xi came and sat on a low plastic stool and let the city thin around them. He asked to be read. She turned his palm and did the work she had always done, tracing small lines, translating tremors into advice. She did not romanticize his fortune. She did not gild him with platitudes. She told him only what she saw, a life that would change if he chose to let it, the warning that merit could be misused, the hope that good deeds stack until they become a house. He listened like a man who had come to understand how to be seen. When she finished, he did a thing that had nothing to do with the law or with headlines. He leaned forward and kissed the callus on the pad of her thumb the way a person might kiss the brow of someone they promised to protect, not with spectacle, but with gravity. It was, in that small and tender way, a private vow. She pulled back and smiled at him, and then at the little camera that had once been a way to pay for rice. "You are still too dramatic," she said. He grinned. "I am learning," he said, "from the best." The city kept moving. New cases came and went. The bell on Wu Yin's stand continued to chime. The network she'd built rescued more names and returned them like flowers to their owners. The valley taught again and had a new pupil or two. Tan Xi sometimes joined, quietly, sitting on the edge of a circle and learning the valley's patient rules about listening. Their lives interwove, not like a tidy braid, but like two ropes tossed together, sometimes crossed, sometimes parallel, sometimes wound for a time to hold something heavy. The public narrative called it a romance and made little of the quiet day-to-day. But the truth they carried in private was that the city had taught them both something essential, that to see another person is an act of love, and to act on seeing is to make a better world. And so, true to the promise that had begun as a ledger line, Wu Yin flourished in plain daylight, her influence and network of warm hands and cottages bright with reclaimed names, while Tan Xi, once inattentive, fell head over heels in a way that made him better at business and braver in his heart.
The arrangement that had once been an accident of other people's choices was no longer a ledger entry for either of them. It was a story they wrote together. If you rooted for the underdog and liked a good unmasking, share this with someone who loves a comeback. If you want more of Wu Yin's journey, more rescues, more secrets, more of the valley's small magic, like and subscribe, and we'll keep the bell atop the corner post ringing.